Hey everyone, so today I'm going to talk about the frontal lobe. Basically, the part of your brain that makes you, you. You know, your personality, how you plan ahead, how you stop yourself. Hey everyone, so today I'm going to talk about the frontal lobe. Basically, the part of your brain that makes you, you. You know, your personality, how you plan ahead, how you stop yourself from saying the first thing that pops in your head. A lot of that comes from right here, the biggest of our four lobes. And I'd like to think of it as the brain's control center, or like the CEO. So in the next few minutes, I'll walk you through where it is, what it controls, what it does day to day, the famous story that changed everything we know about it, what happens when it gets hurt, and why it matters so much for psychology, especially when we talk about teens and development. Okay, location is super easy. Just put your hand on your forehead. You're literally touching it, your frontal lobe right now. It's right at the very front of your brain, and it's the largest lobe by far. Behind it, you have the parietal lobe. Behind that, or below that, the temporal, and in the way back, the occipital. You can see them behind it on this image. There are two little borders that help define it. The central sulcus, the little groove that separates it from the parietal lobe behind, and the lateral fissure that separates it from the temporal lobe below. That matters because right along those edges is really specific jobs to live, especially movement, which we're going to get to next. So, inside the frontal lobe, there are three main players I want you to remember. First, the prefrontal cortex. That's the most forward part, right behind your forehead. This is the one that does the very human stuff, reasoning, planning ahead, decision making, and a lot of your personality. Second is the motor cortex. It is thin strip right along the back edge and in front of the central sulcus we just talked about. This is the part that actually tells your muscles to move. It's organized kind of little body map. Your hands and face get way more space than your torso because they need finer control. And third is Broca's area. For most of us, it's on the left side. This is your speech production area. It coordinates your mouth, tongue, throat, and so you can actually say words. When this gets damaged, you get what's called Broca's aphasia. You know exactly what you want to say in your head, but getting it out is really slow and broken. Okay, so I added this slide because it's hard to picture how big the frontal lobe really is just from one angle. On the left, you've got the front view. On the right side is the side view. And honestly, when you see it from the side, wow, it takes up like a third of your whole brain's surface. It stretches way further back than most people expect before you even hit the parietal and temporal. So it's not just a little cap in the front, it's a huge chunk of real estate, which makes sense because it does so much. All right, so what it actually does day to day is, okay, well, I love the analogy of the control room. So it helps you stay organized and it helps you actually make plans and follow through. It helps you tune out distractions and pay attention. It's the brake pedal that stops you from doing something impulsive, like texting your ex. It helps with that conscience check and is it a good idea or not? And it helps you act appropriately depending on where you are. You act different in class versus at a concert. Basically, without a frontal lobe, you'll have a lot of ideas, but you won't follow through. It's the reason you remember to remember stuff and actually get things done. Okay, let's zoom in a little on two things that I think we all deal with: planning and memory. Planning isn't just big life goals. It's breaking down steps like, okay, I need to study, so first I need notes, then I need quiet time, then I need to actually start. And memory here, I'm not talking about remembering your childhood. I'm talking about working memory. That mental sticky note where you hold on to what you need to do right now while you're doing something else, like holding a client formula in your head while you're mixing color, or remembering your grocery list while you're on the phone. Decision making and following through tie it all together. The frontal lobe is what lets you weigh options and then actually doing the thing. That's why it's so important just getting through a regular day. Two of the most clear-cut jobs are movement and language, and these are super well mapped out. For movement, that primary motor cortex we talked about controls voluntary movement. And here's a cool detail: body parts that need precise control, like your hands, lips, tongue, take up way more brain space than your back or your legs. It and it crosses over. Your left frontal lobe moves the right side of your body and vice versa. For language, Broca's area does the producing. So when it's injured, comprehension is still fine. You understand everything, but speech gets really effortful, short, and kind of broken. I saw a clip of that once, and it really clicked for me how separate understanding and speaking are. Okay, this is where it gets really psych related. Beyond movement and talking, especially that prefrontal cortex part, is a huge for personality and how we act around people. It helps you regulate emotions, so your anger and your amygdala down deeper, but your prefrontal cortex is the one that says, hey, don't yell that loud. Don't yell that out loud. It helps you read the room and act socially appropriate. And over time, it stitches together your emotions, your judgment, your motivation onto what it feels like a stable personality. It talks a lot with the limbic system, especially your amygdala. Hope I'm saying that right. Think of the amygdala as the gas pedal for big emotions, and the prefrontal cortex as the brakes. When that brake line is damaged, that's when you see really dramatic personality changes, which brings us perfectly to the most famous example ever. Okay, so you can't talk about the frontal lobe without talking about Phineas Gage, and this story always gets me. Back in 1848, Phineas was a railroad foreman, super responsible, well-liked, even-tempered. Everyone respected him. He was packing explosive powder with this big iron rod, and it accidentally ignited. The rod shot up, went straight through his cheek and out the top of his skull, taking a huge chunk of his left frontal lobe. Crazy part, he survived. He could talk, he can walk, his memory was fine, but his friend said, and this is a direct quote, he was no longer Gage. He became impulsive, swore a lot, couldn't stick to plans, made bad decisions. The responsible guy was gone. This was huge for science because before this, people thought the frontal lobe was just kind of extra. Gage showed that your frontal lobe is directly tied to who you are, your personality, and self-control. It basically kicked off neuropsychology. So what happens in general when the frontal lobe gets hurt? It depends on where and how much, but you see a pattern. We call it the frontal lobe syndrome. It's that same gauge-like pattern, more impulsive, poor judgment, personality shifts, and because it's right at the front of your skull, it's the first thing to hit in a car accident or fall. That's why concussions affect it so much. There's also front frontotemporal dementia, and unlike Alzheimer's, where memory goes first, the one hit it's this one hits behavior first, and it targets frontal and temporal tissue. And research links differences in prefrontal function and ADHD too, which explain why attention and impulse often go together. So this is that big biopsych idea in life. Brain structure directly shapes behavior. This absolutely blew my mind when I first learned it. Your frontal lobe develops on a totally different timeline than the rest of your brain. A lot of brain growth is fast when you're little, but your prefrontal cortex is literally the last part to finish maturing. A lot of studies say around your mid 20s, like 25-ish. So that explains so much about adolescence. It's not that teens don't know right from wrong, they do. It's that the part that helps with impulse control and thinking 10 steps ahead just hasn't caught up yet. Their bodies are grown, a lot of their thinking is grown, but that brake pedal is still under construction. That's a key thing for developmental psych. Okay, so how do we keep this super important control room healthy? It's actually pretty straightforward. First, protect your head. Helmets for biking, sports, seatbelts in the car. That alone cuts down traumatic brain injury a ton. Move your body. Exercise increases blood flow to the brain, which is like feeding it. Sleep, this is a big one. When you sleep, that's when your brain recharges, repairs, and locks in memories. If you're running on 3 hours, your frontal lobe is absolutely running on fumes. Food matters too. Stuff like omega-3s, antioxidants, vitamins keep your brain challenged with puzzles, reading, learning new skills. That builds what they call cognitive reserve. And being honest, limiting alcohol, and avoiding drug misuse, because both hit the frontal lobe and is in it hard, and it will mess with your judgment. Here is that quick reference chart that I promised, kind of a cheat sheet. It pulls together a lot of what we already talked about: problem solving, judgment, emotional expression, but it also add, adds a couple we didn't go super deep on, like memory, language, and even regulation of sexual behavior. And just so you know, different sources might list these a little differently, and that's normal. Neuroscience isn't always super black and white because the frontal lobe almost never works alone. It's always teaming up with other brain regions. All right, let's wrap this up with the takeaways I really want you to leave with. The frontal lobe is at the front of your brain, the biggest lobe, and inside it you got the prefrontal cortex doing the reasoning and personality work, the motor cortex controlling movement, and the Broca's area handling speech. Together they handle executive function, movement, language, personality, and social behavior. Phineas Gage is still the clearest example of how damage can change who someone is without changing memory or smarts. When the frontal lobe gets injured, whether from an accident or disease, we often see impulsivity and poor judgment, and developmentally, that prefrontal cortex finishing last around your mid 20s helps explain a lot of teen behavior. If I had to sum if I had to sum it up in one sentence, the frontal lobe isn't just about thinking, it's about who we are. Thanks for listening. And that's it. These are the sources I used for this presentation. Thank you guys so much for your time today. I really appreciate you listening.